We can repair your leaky gut, but if you keep swallowing razor blades, you're going to tear it right back open. The University of California, San Diego, biggest research group in vitamin D in the country, says the average American should be taking 9,600 international units of vitamin D3 a day. They've never seen vitamin D toxicity even at 40,000 international units a day, and I haven't either. We now know that glyphosate will particularly target in our gut the basically happy bacteria. Our brain is actually the receiver for the computer that's in our gut.
Today's guest is Stephen Gundry, MD. After a distinguished surgical career as a professor and chairman of cardiothoracic surgery at Loma Linda University, Dr. Gundry changed his focus to curing modern diseases via dietary changes. Today, he's the director of the International Heart and Lung Institute and founder and director of the Center for Restorative Medicine. I know when I was in college, I was taught this particular thing, and I know when you were in college, you were taught this, which was the brain is a sterile environment. All right. So I know when you were going through your training, this is just what we were taught.
Yeah.
But today we know that this isn't so.
That's very true. And what a shocker.
Yeah. So let's talk about this term has now taken over the world of wellness, the microbiome, but it's bigger than that, right? We generally think of the gut.
Yeah.
But let's talk about what's going on with the brain and the bacteria that are basically taking up shop in the human brain.
Yeah, that was one of the, I guess, shockers. We have to realize that the Human Microbiome Project literally finished in 2017, actually not very long ago. And it was really through that project that was sponsored by the NIH that was figured out that you could actually measure RNA and DNA of bacteria and find out, not by culturing them like we used to do, smear them on a petri dish and see if they'd grow, but by actually looking at their genetic signature. And, lo and behold, there's, 1,000 trillion bacteria alone in our gut. And there's, over 1,000 species of bacteria in our mouth, 1,000 different guys, and 700 different species on our skin. And so once they were able to get these guys' identities, then they started looking in other places. And lo and behold, there are bacteria in a normal human's bloodstream, and there are bacteria that have been discovered in the brain. And so are they there as, just passing through, or are they there doing things in the brain? Should they be in the brain? I just came back from the big microbiome meeting that we have every year. This year it was in Malta. And there was actually an intense debate. It was, okay, everybody calm down. We know they're there now, but just because they're there, what are they doing there? And we know, for instance, there are bacteria in cancerous tumors. And each cancerous tumor actually has a different bacterial population. And the question is, okay, did those guys cause the cancer, or are they taking advantage of the cancer, or is the cancer cooperating with the bacteria? Are they both getting something for it? So the whole idea of where we start and they begin is kind of the premise of the gut-brain paradox. How intimately involved are we with our, what I call the holobiome, which is all of these guys?
Yeah. And this is opening up a huge part of the conversation, because it's so funny. We cast off the brain as like this separate area, as if it's not connected to everything else, right? So you mentioned we've got a skin microbiome, we've got a gut microbiome, we've got a microbiome of our lungs, we've got the oral microbiome, the list goes on and on, but then not the brain. It's a sterile environment, end of story. And so one of the coolest parts of your book, which there's many, of course, because that's just who you are and how you write. There was a chapter affectionately titled "Shit for Brains," and I was like, "What is he about to tell me now?" And not only did you break down why you're making this statement, but in particular, you talked about certain things that are going on in our system that can essentially infect or affect our brain, right? And so one of those things that you talked about was lipopolysaccharides, which is, a lot of people in the health space know about lipopolysaccharides now, LPS.
LPS.
But also you point out that LPS can stand for little pieces of shit.
That's correct.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so there are gram-negative and gram-positive bacteria, and it was actually discovered by a scientist long ago by the name of Graham, who developed a stain, and if the stain picked up in certain bacteria, they were gram-positive, and if the stain wasn't picked up by certain bacteria, they were gram-negative. Well, the gram-negative guys are potentially some of the bad actors. There are bad actors who are gram-positive, but the gram-negatives are kind of the bad actors. And they have cell walls that carry an identity. And one of the interesting things that I've written about for years now is our immune system, our white blood cells, can identify who's who in the bacterial community by literally using a barcode scanner that looks at the cell wall and it says, this is a good guy, I know who that is, or, ooh, this is a bad actor and I don't like him and he shouldn't be here. So what we've learned through the years is a lot of these gram-negative bacteria, they're reproducing and they're dying. They're dying all the time. So these dead bacterial pieces, lipopolysaccharides, or little pieces of shit, they literally are pieces of stool, can get through the wall of the gut. And they have several ways of doing it, and I talk about how they can do that. And when they get through the wall of the gut, the immune system says, oh my gosh, there's some bad guys loose in us. Let me give you an example. For instance, in medicine, we talk about people going into septic shock, and they get literally so sick, so full of bacteria in their bloodstream that their blood pressure crashes, their heart is going 1,000 miles an hour, and they can literally die. Interestingly enough, you can take LPSs and take healthy volunteers. Now, these are dead pieces of bacteria, and inject them into the bloodstream of a healthy volunteer, and they will go into septic shock. Their blood pressure will crash, their heart rate will go up, they'll faint. And even though there's no living bacteria, just the immune system reads these guys, holy cow, there are bacteria in here, and we're at war, and this is life-threatening. Okay. Just by the way, Wim Hof, the Iceman, rose to fame because through his breathing techniques, he could be injected with LPSs and sit there and go, yeah, so what? I'm having a nice day. How about you? And all the scientists are going, why isn't this guy dead on the floor? And he actually showed that he could train 20 individuals in his breathing techniques and ice techniques and do the same thing. So it was trainable. He wasn't just a freak of nature. But they're that powerful, even though they're dead. Okay, so fast forward. We can actually measure these guys in people's body, but more importantly, we can actually measure whether our immune system has developed antibodies to them, has recognized them, and is ready to attack them. And I use this in my practice all the time in seeing who's got issues with leaky gut. But the sad thing is these guys can actually get through the wall of our gut, even if we don't have leaky gut. They can actually ride on certain fats that we eat. And in fact, Michael Greger loves to talk about, who happens to be a vegan, loves to talk about that you just put cream in your coffee and you can measure LPSs in the bloodstream, riding on the cream through the wall of the gut. Lipopolysaccharides.
It's fascinating. So you brought forward, you do this all the time, you put certain terms into popular culture, especially in the health space. And, we kind of create a blanket idea about the microbiome, but you talk about the holobiome, right? Being all of these different respective microbial communities coming together to form you.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. And I spend some time in the book talking about one of the great battles between two opposing men, scientists, chemists in France in the 1800s, Louis Pasteur and Antoine Béchamp. And these guys, both of them, this was a time when bacteria were really just first discovered. And fermentation was discovered. And believe it or not, people thought that fermentation, like how grapes turned into wine, was somehow some mystical process until these microorganisms like yeast and bacteria were discovered. And Pasteur came from the camp that bacteria were really evil and that they were the cause of disease. And Béchamp said, no, wait a minute. He said, bacteria are always with us, and it's the terrain that they occur in. And as long as there's good guys and bad guys, and as long as there's this balance between good guys and bad guys, the bad guys don't get out of control because the good guys have ways of, keeping them in their place. But it's when the balance of power gets rearranged that the bad guy can show up. But if we got this terrain back to normal, the bad guys wouldn't have a chance, and they're not necessarily bad. Pasteur was a better public speaker, and Pasteur discovered that it was bacteria that was making French wine go bad. Yeast were supposed to ferment wine, and bacteria would turn it into vinegar. And of course, the King of France thought that was a pretty cool discovery. So Pasteur's discovery, he won the debate. And the idea that the terrain was really the important part fell into disrepute. Now, what's fun, I've read every book about the two of them that's ever been written, and there's no proof, but many books say that on Pasteur's deathbed, he called Béchamp to his side, and he says, "You're right, it is the terrain." So, and I believe that. And what we now know is that he was right, that it's the terrain, it's the tropical rainforest with all these different creatures, all these different sets of bacteria, not to mention molds and funguses and amoebas and worms. It's this literally tropical rainforest. And as long as that balance is fine, as long as, well, to use a Hillary Clinton phrase, it takes a village, then everything is fine. This symbiotic organism functions beautifully. But if something gets unbalanced, that's when a disease process starts. And, Hippocrates knew this 2,500 years ago, the father of medicine, that all disease begins in the gut. And he phrased it, and I wrote about this in The Plant Paradox, and it sounds really California speak, but it's worth mentioning again. He believed that all of us had a green life force energy that wanted us to have perfect health, but that there were external factors preventing that expression of this green life force energy in someone who had an illness. Mm. And the object of a physician was to be a detective, to find out what these external factors were and teach the patient to remove them, and then step back and the green life force energy would fix it. And it sounds really California and hokey, but the doggone thing is right. And now I think we should probably call it the brown life force energy, because what he was referring to was this terrain, this balance, because we happen to be the home of these bacteria, and they want us, as long as everybody's in the right amounts, to have perfect health, because as long as we have perfect health, they got a great place to live.
Yeah. Symbiotic relationship.
It's just the most incredible symbiotic relationship. And the thing that made me have to write this book is, with each passing year after the Human Microbiome Project, we get we're peeling back the layers of the onion of the communication system that exists between the holobiome and us. And you take a deep dive into this, and I'm still just amazed at the depth of communication and control over us that this microbiome has. And the book is really all about that control. And the good news is, it's certainly out of control right now, but the whole book is, guess what? You can get this communication back and get the good guys and get the terrain stabilized.
Yeah. You have this gift of bringing a voice to certain things that I think about, but I don't necessarily put a name on it, you know? I don't put a ring on it. Shout out to Beyonce. But what you did when you mentioned keystone species in the book, for example, you, of course, just talking about what you already shared, we've got this cascade of, trillions of bacteria, and it's really about having everything in balance and keeping the, quote, bad guys in check. But even the bad guys play some significant roles.
Oh, absolutely.
But when the balance gets shifted, when we're in a good place, our bodies are very resilient against different things, whether that's exposure to something, quote, bad, whether it's maybe an overgrowth gets a little bit out of hand, but it's about these keystone species being there and being powerful is part of what helps to keep us healthy.
Yeah. And it's amazing how, number one, these guys are sentient beings. And people go, oh, here he goes, California speak again. Woo woo. These guys can see each other. Now, they don't have eyes, but they can count the number of bacteria around them. They can count who their friends are, who the bad guys are. They can see who the bad guys are. They can actually make, for instance, chemicals to thwart the bad guy's growth. They can even exchange information between each other. So there might be a keystone species that there might be an antibiotic that they don't want to be killed. And maybe one of these keystone species has gotten some information from another bacteria that contains a bit of RNA or DNA that makes that bacteria resistant to a particular antibiotic. And he literally calls his friends and says, hey, I just got some stuff that's going to protect us. The next time the idiot upstairs takes an antibiotic for their runny nose, which was a virus, here, I want to give you this information. And so these keystone species, as long as they're doing the right thing, they're constantly sharing information, which is a good segue into what I talk about in the book, and I've talked about it before. Humans have actually not very many genes. A corn plant has more genes than we do. A sand flea has more genes than we do. And yet, we're the most advanced organism there is. So, on the other hand, bacteria have fewer genes, but there's 100 trillion of them. And they're constantly reproducing. They're constantly exchanging genetic information. They're constantly getting viral genes. And so, for instance, you have your cell phone in your hand. This cell phone doesn't have a lot of computing power, but it's a really good receiver for the computing power that all of us now have loaded into the cloud. And so the text message that you and I maybe just got is from that computer up in the cloud. I submit, and others have submitted, that because there's so much more action down here, that we have actually put most of our computing power into our holobiome, and that our brain is actually the receiver for the computer that's in our gut. Do, 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 do. And the more I look at this intricate connection, the more I'm convinced that, once again, this symbiotic organism, bacteria have been around for 3 billion years. We've been around 100,000. And one can argue that, hey, let's take advantage of all this survival knowledge and let's have them direct our behavior. Now, in the good old days, that was a good deal. The book, right now, there's a lot of bad guys directing some bad behavior. Here's how to turn it around.
Yeah, it sounds like a genius, intelligent thing to do for any higher species.
Yeah.
Let me rely on the cloud, basically, all this data, so that I can focus my big bad genes on doing all this human stuff. And so those genes from the bacteria, the holobiome, functioning as an epigenetic controller.
That's exactly right. That's literally exactly right. And the exciting thing, and I go down some deep rabbit holes, but we now know that these bacteria and even plants can pop off little text messages containing information, containing genetic information, messenger RNA, containing mitochondria. And they're called either exosomes or little packets of information. And they can go up to a cell, merge with the cell, very much like, a space shuttle merges with the docks with the space station, and put its contents into a cell, like a neuron, and say, I want you to do this. I want to turn on these genes. I want you to make this, epigenetics. And so even though we don't have very many genes, we're now realizing that these guys, this processor, can actually send messages to activate certain genes.
It's fascinating.
You want to get really scared?
No, but yes.
Well, I think most of our audience has heard or had a coronary calcium score, a CT of their chest, and you count the amount of calcium in your coronary arteries. And lo and behold, believe it or not, there's no good correlation between coronary calcium and plaque inside blood vessels. There isn't. And I'm a heart surgeon. I would know. I look at these things. But it's used as a score of risk. Now, what the heck is calcium doing in the wall of our blood vessel. There's only two things that can make calcium in us. One is the bacteria in our mouth. And if you've ever gone to the dentist and they're picking out plaque and chipping away at it, those are biofilms formed by bacteria with calcium. They're little igloos. So they can make calcium. But the only other thing that's capable of making calcium is bone cells, osteoblasts. So there's an amazing paper coming back to LPSs that when these little pieces of shit activate a part of our immune system called macrophages, they're white blood cells. Macrophages go through the bloodstream and they land on the blood vessels in our heart, and they talk to the smooth muscle cells, which makes the blood vessels move, the second layer of the lining of your blood vessels. And they take these little exosomes or extracellular vesicles, and they send a text message to this smooth muscle cell. I want you to turn into a bone cell and start making calcium. Whoa. And you go, well, wait a minute, that's a smooth muscle cell. Well, then you go, well, how did it know to be a smooth muscle cell? It's got the same genes as a bone cell, same genes. It's the epigenetic message. So that macrophage activated by LPSs tells the smooth muscle cell, start becoming a bone cell and start laying down calcium. Whoa. So I use that to my patients who walk in and say, oh my gosh, I've got a really high coronary calcium score. I go, guess what? You've got a lot of LPSs going through the wall of your gut, activating your immune cells that are telling your smooth muscle cells to become a different cell. Why? Because if you're under attack by bacteria, maybe you want to put down a wall of protection. And that is the segue into why we have so much dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. And why do we have all these amyloid beta plaques? Why do we have all these tau proteins? As I tell my patients, what are these things doing up in your brain? Well, anybody who remembers 9/11 knows that after that, all of a sudden, all these concrete barriers went up in front of every important building, in front of airports, in, government, whatever. I want them to visualize that these proteins that are in people's brains are concrete barriers that have been put in place because the attackers, the terrorists on the way to this protected citadel, the brain. Mm. And if you visualize it that way, you go, oh my gosh, we shouldn't be trying to use drugs to tear apart these tau proteins and amyloid beta proteins. Those are actually protective barriers. Why are they being erected? Oh my gosh, because the guys from the gut are loose, and it totally flips everything we think about this on its head.
Whoa. Yeah. I've had 3 Keanu Reeves moments over here. Whoa. Oh my goodness. So I had visions of like Wolverine, X-Men stuff while you were talking about that, having a bony heart, bony blood vessels. And man, that is so fascinating. It's just about the signals. It's all about the signals.
It's all about the signals.
And we've got, and if we're being honest about it at this point, what entity has the most signaling power in our bodies? It is these bacteria communities. They've got more information, more data, more genes, everything. And we're not focused there. When we're wondering what's happening upstairs in our brain, why are we having epidemics of mental health conditions, Alzheimer's, dementia? Alzheimer's is now, it's almost in the top 5 leading causes of death in the United States. Yeah. People do not know that. And it didn't just happen out of nowhere. It has happened recently,
Yeah.
but there's a reason behind it. And you're really helping to pull back the curtain with this gut-brain paradox. And so let's talk a little bit more about this. Like, what is going on? What's at the root, which you've already uncovered this, but let's talk a little bit more about it. The root of our mental health epidemics. Can addressing what's happening with our microbiome help to resolve issues like depression?
Yeah, that's the exciting thing. I've been doing what I do now for about 25 years. And a number of the patients who came to see me for other reasons, whether it was an autoimmune disease or diabetes or being obese, a lot of these people were on antidepressants. And so many of them were on 2, 3 antidepressants, and they'd been on it for so many years that often they wouldn't even put depression under a symptom or problem. And I told them naively, I guess initially, that, well, I think you're going to find that we can get you off of these just by fixing your gut. And this was actually before the Human Microbiome Project. I was just echoing Hippocrates. And lo and behold, as we measured their leaky gut being fixed, as we measured their gut diversity, their terrain improving, these people were able to wean off their antidepressants. Now it gets even more interesting. Now that we've been able to identify who's in there, we know that there are certain bacteria that highly associate with depression. This was first discovered in rats, where you could take germ-free rats who have no microbiome and have them eat human poop from depressed individuals. Now, rats love to eat poop. They just think poop's delicious. So you can feed them depressed individuals' poop, and these rats will get depressed. They will get all the symptoms of depression, and believe it or not, you can measure depression in rats. They don't sit on a couch and complain. And then you can feed them poop from happy individuals, which has a completely different microbiome. And these depressed rats will become happy because there's a happy microbiome too. The depressed microbiome, unfortunately, that terrain becomes overloaded with the depressed guys, and the happy guys have been kind of pushed to the side. But you can fortify that happy guys. And one of the real shockers of the book, we know that glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, was actually patented as an antibiotic, not as a weed killer. Yeah. And we now know that glyphosate will particularly target in our gut the basically happy bacteria, the ones that make tryptophan and serotonin and dopamine and GABA, and kill them off. But the depressive bacteria are far more resistant to glyphosate. And we wonder, why is it that since glyphosate was introduced in the 1970s, that we've had this epidemic, of anxiety and depression? Obviously, there's lots of other good reasons, COVID and social media, but the correlation is incredibly strong. And now that we know that we can measure depressive bacteria and happy bacteria and know that glyphosate kills off the good guys, you go, holy cow, what have we done? What have we done?
Just with that alone, because of course we're like, are we consuming enough glyphosate to really make a difference? Because, there's such a difference with our mental health. Well, the Environmental Working Group did an analysis a couple of years ago, and they found over 80% of the conventional grain products on store shelves was contaminated with glyphosate, like a notable amount to be dangerous for humans.
Yeah.
Over 80% of the products. It is crazy. And not to mention, there's been this whole thing, and, there have been great documentaries about this, but the cross-contamination issue and just even organic stuff, it's very difficult to find places, especially here in the United States, but really all over the world, that aren't contaminated with very dangerous pesticides like glyphosate.
Yeah, it's, I mean, a lot of organic oats are contaminated with glyphosate because of drift. I've got a friend who's a biodynamic winemaker in Santa Barbara County. I'll drop his name, Steve Beckman Vineyards, who farms biodynamically, which is, one step beyond organic. And he's got one kind of parcel that he doesn't certify as either organic or biodynamic. And I said, well, why don't you? And he says, well, because my neighbor sprays with glyphosate in his rows and it drifts and we can detect it. And he says, I sell those grapes off to other people. But yeah, you're right. Just the drift from spraying a field will contaminate an organic orchard.
So what do we do with, obviously, again, that great analogy of building a wall, essentially, with the beta amyloid plaque, with the tau proteins, our body is operating in response with what we call these plaques, right? Which we blame cholesterol, for example, and cholesterol might just be there. It's like blaming the firemen for the fire, What can we do to help our bodies to stop putting up these walls with our brain health? And, again, having the outcome, which is going to be different from person to person. You might express it as symptoms of dementia. You might express it as symptoms of depression or anxiety or ADHD. The list goes on and on. How do we start to resolve this issue so our brain can let down the guard and we can start to have good mental health and good cognitive function again?
Well, for years, most of my interest was on repairing leaky gut and the causes of leaky gut. And leaky gut is a real thing. It is a measurable thing. A pediatric gastroenterologist who's now at Harvard, Alessio Fasano, proved, for instance, that gluten, which happens to be a lectin, a plant protein, causes leaky gut. And he showed the mechanism. And subsequently, we've learned how to measure the degree of leaky gut with blood tests. We can learn how activated the immune system is to leaky gut. And we can actually follow leaky gut being repaired and the immune system standing down. And this is what I do with my patients. But the other piece is what Bachamp was talking about. We can repair leaky gut, but you've got to have this really great set, this tropical rainforest of bacteria that are all kind of pulling their weight. We'll use a football analogy. They're really the offensive line front four that protects the quarterback from the oncoming linemen, rushers and linebackers. That if they're intact, they basically tell the quarterback, hey, take all the time you want back there, find your receiver, no one's going to get to you. Quarterback says, great, I'll be fine. Unfortunately, our front four has been decimated by antibiotics, by glyphosate, by environmental toxins, by microplastics. We could go on and on, by endocrine disruptors. So now our front four, we've already used up the third stringers, and now we're getting the water boy to come in and try. And the quarterback now is running around, getting tackled, getting crushed, and our immune system is just always on hyper alert, always sending out alarms like, oh my gosh, we're getting overrun. But I mean, there's no stopping these guys. We'll try to hold the fort down here, but the immune system now signals to cells in the heart, to cells in the brain, the immune system in the brain, our bodyguards, the microglial. We can't hold them back. Protect these guys up here. So the immune system in the brain says, oh my gosh, we're getting messages that they're coming up. In fact, we just saw some come up. Let's put roadblocks in their way. Let's throw down all this garbage, these walls to try and slow them down. And what the really scary thing is, nerves have all these connections to other nerves that are called dendritic processes. So one nerve, it's almost like a spoke of an airport. Check in and then ride a car out to your plane. So these guys are talking to each other like this. When they hear the message that the bad guys are coming, the first thing they do to protect the nerve itself is they literally eat away these processes. And we can actually watch them under the microscope. Little Pac-Man eating away these dendritic processes till you get right back to the nerve. Well, what happens when all those guys are pruned? Guess what? These nerves can't talk to each other. Memories can't exist. And so we know the process now, and it all is coming from the alarm signals from the gut.
This is mind-blowing stuff. Mind-blowing stuff. So we've got a good idea. And again, we're just scratching the surface. And as I said at the beginning of the show, this is what you do. You bring all these huge paradigm shifts for everybody. And then it becomes part of the lexicon, part of the popular culture in this field of health. And first of all, I want to give you your props. I want to give you your credit because you've been such a pioneer. It's not the appropriate word because, it's not as cool. All right. You're so much cooler the way that you go about this stuff and, really just pushing this conversation forward as a thought leader. And you spend so much time. One of the things I was talking about before you got here was, in a whole previous aspect of your career and the inventions and the devices and the patents and, all the published papers and all this stuff. And, just getting to this place where you're spending a lot of your time and energy sharing your wisdom and reaching a lot of people to, again, help to push this conversation forward, to help change health overall. And so you dig in much deeper, obviously, in the book, The Gut-Brain Paradox, on the causes, what's going on. But what I'd love to do to close things out is to share a few of the insights on what we can start to do to change this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, number one, that anybody can do starting today. 80% of my patients in Southern California are vitamin D deficient when they walk through the door. And vitamin D does three things that are so important. First of all, vitamin D is a hormone. It's not a vitamin. Vitamin D is critical for repairing the wall of the gut. The wall of the gut is only 1 cell thick. And it's the same surface area, coming back to sports, as 1 or 2 tennis courts. So when people are watching the Indian Wells BNP Paribas Open in a couple weeks, there's at least 1 tennis court of surface area inside of us, probably 2. That is only 1 cell thick. And vitamin D is essential to keep that wall intact. The University of California, San Diego, biggest research group in vitamin D in the country, says the average American should be taking 9,600 international units of vitamin D3 a day. That's 10,000 international units of vitamin D. They've never seen vitamin D toxicity even at 40,000 international units a day, and I haven't either. I've never seen it in my practice, and I've been measuring it for 30 years, every 3 months. That's number one, repair the wall of the gut. Number two, the higher your vitamin D level is, the more diverse your microbiome is, the better that terrain is. Higher vitamin D, better terrain. Number three, normally white blood cells are kept calm by vitamin D. And vitamin D says, hey guys, we know there might be some bad things going on, but calm down, get your finger off the trigger, and just chill a little bit. If your leaky gut is happening, and quite frankly, folks, most people have leaky gut, the immune system is wearing a Kevlar vest, they got 2 AK-47s, and their fingers are on the trigger. Vitamin D, if you get a high enough dose, tells the immune system, no, get your finger off the trigger, put down your gun, just quiet down. So It's three factors that getting your vitamin D is really the number one thing. The number two thing, and this was discovered by the husband and wife microbiology team at Stanford, the Sonnenbergs. Now, the Sonnenbergs, I have great respect for them. They're doomsayers. They basically think we have a desert wasteland for a microbiome in all of us, and there may be no hope. I happen to think, and my patients have shown me, that we can turn that desert wasteland into a tropical rainforest. But how do you do that? Well, one is we should be eating prebiotic fiber. Everybody knows probiotics, friendly bacteria. Prebiotics are the foods that the friendly bacteria need to eat. They produce what are now called postbiotics, which is part of the messaging system between them and us. So they took a prebiotic, a good prebiotic, inulin, which is in asparagus, it's in artichoke hearts, it's in chicory family vegetables like radicchio, that kind of red Italian lettuce that you see in all the stores now. So they gave healthy volunteers inulin, and they looked at their gut microbiome diversity, their terrain, and they looked at their inflammation markers. And lo and behold, despite eating all this prebiotic fiber, their gut diversity didn't change and their inflammation markers didn't change. And they go, well, that's weird. They said, we must be missing something. So they did the same experiment. This time, they had the people eat fermented foods. Now, in this case, they used yogurts and kefirs primarily, but it could have been sauerkraut, could have been vinegar, it could have been fermented cheeses. You were eating a fermented meat stick. We could have used that. Could have been kombucha. And they also gave them the inulin. Lo and behold, the combination of the fermented foods and the prebiotics, they got more gut diversity, and happy day, their markers of inflammation went down. So that's really part two, is you got to give these guys what they need to eat, but you got to have preformed postbiotics, which are contained in fermented foods. So that's number two. Number three, and I show this all the time to my patients. Look, we can repair your leaky gut. We can rebuild your tropical rainforest. But if you keep swallowing razor blades, you're going to tear it right back open. Now, my humble opinion, razor blades are these lectins that made me infamous or famous, depending on your point of view. And these are plant compounds that are proteins that are really good for causing leaky gut. So those are and where are they? Well, you've already mentioned one. Most grains have lectins. There are two grains that don't, millet and sorghum. So millet and sorghum are great, but wheat, rye, barley, corn, oats, quinoa, they're no-nos. The nightshade family, tomatoes, potatoes, eggplant, peppers, and believe it or not, goji berries, are full of lectins. Beans are the most notorious of the lectin-containing foods. But good news, if you ferment beans the way they're properly, the lectins are destroyed, or if you pressure cook beans. I had 2 different dishes of beans this past week. They were pressure cooked. You can buy them pressure cooked now. A couple companies sell them, or you get a pressure cooker. So do that. So number 1, get your vitamin D up. Number 2, get prebiotics and postbiotics in terms of fermented foods. And number 3, stop swallowing razor blades. And you can start today.
Amazing, amazing. How many people did you say, what's the percentage of people that are deficient in vitamin D?
80% in Southern California. In Southern California. In Brooklyn, New York, 92% of people are deficient in vitamin D.
This should be a red alert for everybody. Get your vitamin D. Of course, get your sun exposure, but this is a place for supplementation. This is a place for eating more vitamin D rich foods. Make it a priority.
Yeah.
So
and
much
mushrooms are
on
a great source of vitamin D, and they're a great source of prebiotic fiber. So it's a win-win.
I love win-wins. That's what it's all about. That's what I get when I'm hanging out with you.
That's right. Great to see you again, too.
Yeah.
Been too long.
I know. Time flies when you're having fun. Gut-brain paradox. Can you let everybody know the best place to pick up a copy?
Well, hopefully go to your local bookstore. I've had a number of bestsellers, so usually they're stocked in your local bookstore. COVID, as we all know, killed the local bookstores, and they're coming back, and we need to support them. But the obvious places, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get your books, it'll be there. Comes out April 15th, and so there you go.
And I'll make sure everybody check the show notes for a link to the book, because I know you're going to have some bonuses as well. Yeah. So make sure to check out that link. And again, you've got one of the top shows in the health space, so people could check out
the Dr. Gundry podcast.
Dr. Gundry podcast, yes.
Got nearly 1 million YouTube subscribers, coming up to 2 million for my newsletter. So, and hopefully I appear while you're scrolling every day, weaving at you with Gundry MD.
Yeah, the real you, though, because we were talking about
the
this.
Real you.
There's AI you out there doing ads on YouTube and saying some wild stuff too. But
it's not me.
It's not you. I was just like, as soon as I saw it, I was going to send it to you and text you, but I just forgot to. But seeing you today, I'm like, this isn't you, is it? You're like, no, that's not me.
No.
AI is bonkers. Bonkers. Yeah. It's full on your voice. I mean, it's not quite as, it's missing a little spice. It's missing a little bit of that wholesomeness, but it's close enough to fool people.
It's impressive. I mean, it really is. And as soon as we shut one down, they pop up. We just play whack-a-mole with them. Yeah. They're getting really good at this, unfortunately.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's people who have poor gut-brain connections who are doing that. All right, if we get everybody feeling good, they're going to do things with more integrity and love and real appreciation. And I appreciate you so much for all the wisdom that you continue to share, and thanks for coming to hang out with me.
Well, thanks for having me. Great to see you.
Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here.
About a quarter of the UK population have this parasite called blastocystis, which, if you look up any medical book, will say, oh, it's associated with bloody diarrhea. Take this anti-parasite drug, a very nasty one, to sort of deworm you and get rid of it. And it turns out it's associated with good health